Thank you, and hello everyone. Again, my name is Eric Whitley, Senior Account Director at Leading to Lean. And today I want to talk a little bit about something a little bit near and dear to my heart, actually a few things, manufacturing and fishing with my grandkids. I think it would be good to give you a little bit of a background here on exactly what I'm talking about and how I kind of relate the two together. Ever since I was pretty much in a professional career, I have been in manufacturing, and for a long time now, I have been teaching total productive maintenance and lean techniques pretty much around the world, and have been a consultant for 25 years. Joined Leading to Lean about 5 years ago as a manufacturing person to kind of help put our software in place. So I come from everything that I'm going to talk about today from a manufacturing standpoint. Also, in parallel to all of that time has been my love of fishing. So I love to fish. I love to get out and fish, spend time on my boat. I've fished all around the world. I've had an opportunity and have been blessed to travel for a living and pretty much try to, everywhere I go, try to get some type of fishing in there as I've traveled around the world and taught lean and manufacturing techniques. I've kind of coupled that with my fishing. The other thing that I've been able to do is kind of pass that on to my children. I've taught them to fish from an early age, and then they have in turn taught their children how to fish. And so it's kind of a family tradition. We love to spend time together. We love to do that. But the one thing I've found as I've gotten a little older, the one thing that I really enjoy the most is taking my grandkids fishing and spending time with them and teaching them and just being with them and being able to kind of pass that generational thing on to them. And they really are beginning to get it and understand. We just had a great trip with my oldest grandson last weekend, as a matter of fact. So everything I'm going to talk about today is in conjunction of kind of what I've learned as I've taught them how to fish and I've taught my children how to fish, and as I fish myself. And then, I've spent a lot of time out on the front of my boat by myself, being able to contemplate my job and those things. And I really began to kind of relate these two things together and kind of come up with an idea for this presentation of the things that I've learned over the years. And so one of the things that I really have noticed here when it comes to fishing and with manufacturing is that there really is a gap. There's a gap in generations. There's a gap in the knowledge. There's a gap in the skills that we have when it comes to being successful. And in manufacturing, as I take a look at that gap, being a director at a software company, the one thing that I really have noticed is that there is a gap in this technological knowledge. And what I mean by that is we often equate that gap to be a gap of our older folks are struggling with technology. That is true. But the other side of that is the fact that we have this one side of the workforce that, or I should say one side of generation, that has this high level of technical skill. But what they don't have is they don't have the experience that our experienced workforce has. And so the gap really is between those two groups of people. It's not necessarily just the older folks don't understand technology. It's the younger folks who understand technology don't understand manufacturing. And so we have to be able to bridge that gap in manufacturing in order to make sure that future generations in manufacturing understand how to build a product and how to take care of equipment and how to run the manufacturing floor using the technological knowledge that they have in order to be successful out on the floor. So last year, Leading to Lean, we did a survey, and we called it our L2L Manufacturing Index. And you can go see the full survey on our website at L2L.com. If you do / Leading to Lean Manufacturing Index, you'll go right to it. But there are some really interesting things that we found in this index that we took last year. And we mainly concentrated on Generation Z, and we concentrated in and around manufacturing. And one thing that we found is that Generation Z really would consider working in manufacturing. And there is kind of a high level of this new generation, or higher level of any generation that we've seen, of those folks that would consider actually working in manufacturing. So that's really great news for manufacturing, and really great news for the automotive business, because this is the new generation of people that are going to come on board and actually begin to build the products that we need in order to build cars going forward, right? And so some other stuff that we found very interesting is that really 56% of those folks would consider working in tech industries, of course, and 27% would consider working in manufacturing. So here's the rub. Here's what we have to be able to do going forward, is that we have to make manufacturing equivalent to a tech industry. And what do I mean by that? What we've seen is, as we install our software in different companies, we have seen that having a usable piece of technology out on the shop floor, having something that the newer generation can grab a hold of in conjunction with what they use on a day-to-day basis, really helps them get involved in the manufacturing process. And so we learned some really interesting things in this index. And one of them is that Generation Z, the new generations, will join the manufacturing force if we give them the technology to do that. But the other side of this is, we want to install that technology, but we have this group of baby boomers, right? That we sometimes see them as people who will not grab a hold of that technology. We sometimes in manufacturing hold ourselves back from deploying the latest and greatest in technology because we are so worried that the new technology is going to intimidate the older workforce. We have to understand that about 10,000 baby boomers every day turn 65 in the U.S. alone. The other thing that's really scary about this is that we understand that about the average age of retirement is between 61 and 65. So if we put that in there, I mean, if you just think 10,000 people every day are retiring out of this generation, and even more, right? And what that means is that pre-COVID numbers are that in 2020, about 31 million jobs are going to be vacated by this age group in the United States. What do we have to do in order to backfill those jobs with the experience and with the knowledge that this Silver Tsunami is taking out with it as it goes? That trend then is going to continue until about 2030. So it's very important that we come up with a solution for that. You know, the one thing that we know is that the new workforce coming in doesn't really have the numbers to replace all of those people. So how do we bridge this gap? How do we go forward when it comes to that? We have to understand a couple of things. First of all, we need to really get rid of the biases that we have about generations and about technology. You saw a bunch of pictures of me at the beginning of this presentation, but look, that's me there at the top there in a recent fishing trip that I've taken with my children and with my grandchildren. Well, I'm not a young guy, and I joined a tech firm about 5 years ago. The reason why I was brought onto this tech firm is because of the ability to talk technology and to talk manufacturing at the same time. That really is kind of my niche inside of the organization. I learned this software 5 years ago. So the bias that older folks cannot or have a hard time with software is really bogus. Every day we, us older folks, we get on to Facebook, we post pictures of our grandkids, we're looking at all the latest blogs, we're looking at, we're using software, we're using apps, we're using all of that. So really we have to get rid of the bias that The older generation doesn't want to use technology. We've got to move forward with technology. The next thing that we have to do is we really have to challenge these stereotypes within inside of our workforce. And so, the one I just talked about is that older workers struggle with tech. We need to get rid of that one. But the other one that we often hear is that the younger workers, the people that have the technological prowess, if you will, really lack the attention span to be in manufacturing and to be in business. And I'd like to, just point out that picture to the right there, that's my son. He's 30 years old. He's a technological genius when it comes to marketing. The kid has 2 separate online businesses. He holds down a full-time building rockets that are going to go to the moon and go to Mars. And so we have to challenge that bias as well, that this generation doesn't want to do the work. They want to do the work, but if we give them the opportunity to do the work using the technology that we're using today and allow them to use the technology, they're going to do it. They're going to jump in and they're going to be part of manufacturing going forward. And then, of course, we have to cultivate the new generation. Right? We have to incorporate the new technology, the familiar technology to this organization, but to this generation. And we have to address those skill gaps. Don't make assumptions about the skills. Don't make assumptions that people have or don't have skills. And I'm going to talk a lot more about skills here going forward, because I think it's really is one of the most important things going on in manufacturing today. And one thing is, give coaching and mentoring opportunities to those that have the skill. Though in manufacturing, we have people who have the skill, help them mentor the new generations coming forward. And I think we're going to be able to make up a lot of ground here if we understand that we've got to use the technology that the new generations know, that we have to then deploy the older generations to mentor those. And let me tell you, my experience also has said that in the older generations mentoring the new generations on how to build product, on how to run a manufacturing floor, in return, the new generations then mentor us older folks on how to use the new technology that's coming forward. I've seen it 100 times in my job. And so it really is something that we really need to get over. So what's the catch here? There's not just a technological gap here, but there's also an experience gap. That gap goes both ways between both generations, and we need to use both generations to teach each other. It's not just a one-way street. If we want to be successful, we have to be able to have those gaps filled. We need to remove all of the biases that we have, all the stereotypes. Everybody in your organization can actually learn. It doesn't matter what age group they're in. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that here in a few minutes as well. Right? So the generational gap really is a gap in skill. It's not a gap in attitude. And I'll hit on that a lot, because I think that's important for everybody to understand, that we often look at a skill issue as an attitude issue, and it's not. It's simply a skill issue. And once that skill is brought up to standard, it really seems like the attitudes and the fighting of technology goes away. And we also have to remember this, that each generation really learns in its own way. And we have to understand how that generation learned. You cannot teach a 55-year-old the same way you're going to teach a 25-year-old. So you have to understand that, and you have to put systems in place in order to make that happen. So let's talk a little bit about that system. I want to talk about kind of the principle that it's really easier to catch fish that you can see. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at the modern day fishing boat. Let's call it Fishing 4.0. Everybody's familiar with Industry 4.0. Let's call this Fishing 4.0. The technological advancements in professional fishing over the last 10 to 20 years has been right on par with how it's been in the manufacturing sector. If you take a look, this is a picture I took last year as I was a judge at one of the professional tournaments in Arkansas. You can see right here what goes on in the front of the boat. There is a global positioning unit there. There's that trolling motor is guided by the GPS unit. Push button anchors. There's side image scans, 3D side structure scans. You can see it all the way down to like pebble size, bottom structure. These big 12-inch monitors, there's what's called a forward-looking pan optics, where it actually scans out in front of the boat, some 25 to 50 yards, where the fisherman can actually see the structure and the fish that are inside of that structure out in front of the boat, to the point that he can drag the lure over the top of the structure and see the lure as it comes through the water and watch the fish come up and hit the lure. And then, of course, there are specialized rod and reel combinations for each and every scenario of rod type, line weight, lure type. And each scenario that he may run into during the day, there's a specialized combination that runs into. So the technology has really kind of moved forward right in line with what we see in manufacturing. So we talk about Industry 4.0. So what is Industry 4.0? Well, it's kind of the collision, if you will, of kind of operational excellence, automation, digitalization, and then really the simplicity, the simplification of all of these complex systems. See, the one thing that we've noticed is that when it comes to getting people on board with being able to see data and see metrics, is that our systems in the past have been complex. But what we're learning now through the use of the things like the cloud and Internet of Things is that we are really making these things much easier to deal with. If you think about simple apps that we deal with every single day on your phone, or simple computer programs that you deal with every single day, if you really take a minute and think about the technological advancements that it took in order to get to this point, it really is amazing what we're doing and the simplification of that. So if you think about a software in the cloud that you can carry around an iPad and access that software in real time anywhere from the plant floor, the technology that it has taken to get there is really amazing. And so what we are seeing is this collision of all of these really advanced technologies in software and in IoT sensors and in automation that give us all of this real-time data out on the shop floor. It really is amazing. And so what all that is for is to be able to see. And so one of the things that we see is that people are making huge mistakes when it comes to this principle. So what they understand is that they want their people to see the data, and they understand that they need to give people the data in order to make decisions out on the shop floor. But where the mistake comes is that they believe that full integration is the answer. And what we've learned, and what I've learned over the last few years, is this, is that you really should only integrate out on the shop floor and give people this data when it really makes sense. We call it appropriate integration. And what do I mean by that? Well, you should only integrate your systems out on the shop floor when it really gives people that visibility to problems. When you have these massive data collection processes that you're doing manually, maybe, and it can automate that, or it should trigger a human process in some way. And then if you have any data that's like stuffed away in old, soiled, or unseen systems, if you want to make that more accessible, if you need that, that's a great way to integrate. And it should save time for large numbers of users. So follow those rules when you're trying to decide what you should integrate and what you should not. Here's where you should not integrate. When it only saves a few button clicks. So if you're looking to spend a lot of money to save a few button clicks, yeah, you probably shouldn't spend money there. or automating what we call infrequent tasks. If you're only doing a task once or twice a month, then you probably shouldn't spend time to go integrate there. If you take data, if you're automating data and pushing it into, data lakes where you're not ever going to use that data again, then you're kind of wasting your time. And then if you are integrating and you entrench old legacy systems that people hate to use, but what you're doing is you're tying into those systems so that people have to continue to use those old systems, you want to make sure that you don't do that as well. The big mistake that we see is that people just have this pie in the sky thought process around Industry 4.0. And so what they want to do is spend millions and millions of dollars on totally integrating the system or preparing a lights out operation, right? If you're driven by those aspirations, think twice before you go out and spend that money. And then if you're spending dollars to save pennies in your integration just so you could say that you're integrated, you probably should not go do that. So make wise decisions and use what we call appropriate integration when it's about bringing the data to the people out on the shop floor, right? And that data is important, that they have that they have it in real time. It's a must that you use systems in order to be able to give real-time feedback, right? So the team leaders are, in this case, right, the captains of the boat. They've got to have the skill to interpret that data as well. So make sure that they have that. If you look at my examples here, one is, a Pareto chart from our software that's generated automatically. The other one is fish on a fish finder. And you can see right where the fish are. Each one of those little green arcs is a fish. And so, there's really no reason, if you have real-time data, to go focus or to go fish anywhere other than where the fish are. So you want to make sure that your teams have this real-time data in order to be able to go focus in on the area where they're going to be most productive, right? Fishing in unproductive waters will ruin team motivation. If I take my grandkids out to the middle of the lake and I know there isn't a fish in 300 feet of water in the middle of the lake, and I have them fish, they're not going to catch fish. And if they don't catch fish, they're going to become frustrated. And guess what? They're not going to want to go with Grandpa fishing anymore. Same with your teams. If you have people making improvements to things that if you make that improvement, it's not going to have any value to safety, quality, throughput, cost, morale. If it's not going to have any value to those things, but yet you're making them go and improve that stuff, you're going to lose them. And they're going to walk away from it. So make sure that you are fishing in productive waters. Make sure that you are improving in areas where if you make improvements, it's going to pay off. And make sure you have systems that show you that in real time right there in front of you. So what's the catch with this deal? So Industry 4.0 is really the convergence of all of the things that we've talked about up to this point, right? Excellence, operational excellence, and really smart automation and digitalization and simplicity of all these things that we've been dealing with over the years. But you've got to make sure you do it properly. You got to make sure you use appropriate integration if you're going to go put all these things in place. And then give things where your team can visualize and see that data immediately so they can make the right choices of where to go spend their time. Right. And then, so your lean execution system should do that. Your processes and your system should give you and be able to collect that information and then display it for you properly out on the shop floor. So make sure that you have the right system in place in order to go do that. The next thing I want to talk about is skill and teaching the techniques. We've talked about, making sure we have the data in front of people in order to be able to go do the work. But let's talk about, do they actually have the skill to be able to go do that work and to be able to apply those skills? So you want to make sure that you want to teach skills that are going to be immediately used, right? So that it doesn't frustrate the person. Part of my past life was I helped implement an operator certification process at a plant. And the one thing that we understood and that we quickly found out, that training is not about putting butts in seats. It's about the transfer of skill. So if you're having training classes to where you are just putting butts in seats and having people sign a paper that say, yes, I'm trained, then you are not transferring a skill. Some of those people may get it, some of them may not. But simply having a training class is not the transfer of skill. So make sure you have the right system in place in order to be able to track that process of, is the skill transferred? Basically ask the question, can you or can you not perform the task that we're asking you to do? If people can perform the task, then they don't need training. If they can't perform the task, then they need training. And so you've got to understand that a lack of skill can often be misdiagnosed as poor attitude or lack of motivation. If I don't teach my grandchildren how to fish properly and they don't catch fish, they're going to turn around and they're going to sit down in the boat and they're going to say, I'm tired of fishing. And they're going to say, I don't want to fish. But in reality, what it is that they don't have the skill to do it properly. And so it's going to frustrate them and they're going to quit. The same thing happens out on the shop floor. If we are setting expectations of people to go perform and we don't give them that skill to perform, then they are going to quickly become frustrated and we're going to lose them. So we want to make sure that we're putting those skills out properly. Listen, if we equate this with fishing and we say, basically there's three kinds of fishing. There's commercial fishing, large trawler boats that are out there catching masses of fish for the world. There's that type of fishing. There's competitive fishing. I've talked a little bit about that. And then there's fun fishing. If we equate that to the factory floor, there's basically three things going on in business. There's these big business transformations, right? Big turnarounds and huge product launches. And, sometimes a corporation will have big tiger teams that travel the world and go from plant to plant to plant to improve a plant in here. That's the big commercial improvement that we're looking at. Competitive wise, we can look at, we bring in consultants, or we have these really experienced employees that we lean on, or we have internal operational excellence programs. This is kind of the competitive market of improving business and getting better. And then at the shop floor level, what we call the fun fishing level, we have Kaizen events and we have, operator fixes where the operators are becoming involved in making things better. I had a friend of mine that used to tell me a great saying: every minute of every hour of every day, a plant can get better. The only way that we work on this every minute and every hour level is we have the people who actually do the work out on the shop floor actually making improvements to the way that they do work. So we have to make sure that we understand where everybody is at in this hierarchy. Where are your folks? Do you know where they're at? And you have to understand that your employees, your contractors, consultants, all of those people that you bring in are all at differing levels. So you have to have a system that's going to identify where that skill gap is. Failure to recognize where that skill gap is going to create unobtainable expectations. I go back to my example about taking my grandkids out to the middle of the lake. If I take them out there and I don't give them the right bait and I don't give them the right fishing poles and I don't put them in the right spot, and then I get angry at them because they're not catching fish, or I get frustrated at them because they're not catching fish, is the same thing as us putting our workers out on the shop floor, not giving them the right tools, not giving them the right skills, and then expecting them to make good quality product. That's going to cause a problem, and we're going to see that problem. So we have to diagnose that whenever that happens. We have to have a system that allows us to see when people are trained and when they're not trained. Do you have, the latest technology that allows you to see, hey, when somebody checks into a production line, they have all the skills that they need for that production line, or they don't have all the skills that they need for that production line. So make sure you have the systems in place that are going to allow you to see that and do those checks in real time out on the shop floor. One of the things that I've always followed in my career is this model from Dr. Robert Mager and Peter Pipe. And I've really and I'll focus just today just on that skill thought process. Because one of the things that we have to make sure is before we move down the road of any type of human performance, we always have to make sure that people have the skill. I always go back to the can you or can you not perform the task that we're asking you to perform. If they cannot perform it, then we know it's a skill issue. If they can perform it and choose not to, then we know it's a motivation issue. That's a whole other webinar. We can talk about that later on. But right now, what we're talking about is, do you or do you not have the skill in order to perform that task that we're asking you to perform? And then we have to be able to pass that on to them if they don't have that skill. So what's the catch here? Each team member is at a different level. You have to understand that everybody is at a different level, and that you have to have the system in place that's going to allow you to see where each team member is at, right? Skills and training is not just about butts and seats. If you come away with one thing out of this section, this is the one thing that I want you to understand, that it's not about did you sign the paper or did you not sign the paper. And I know all of you know what I'm talking about when it comes to that. And then failure to recognize those skill deficiencies is really probably, to me, one of the number one things that's happening in manufacturing these days, is that we do not have the systems in order to recognize skill deficiencies. And it's often misdiagnosed as a people problem. But in reality, what it is, it's a skill problem. All right. And so the final thing that I want to talk about today is the fact that not everyone catches fish. All right. We know that. In the modern day manufacturing sector, we know that there are people out there that want to come into work every day, do their job, and they want to go home. They don't necessarily want to catch fish, but we have to be able to build success. And sometimes people don't catch fish because they're trying to catch fish, and we need to build on that success. So really quick, one of the things I think we lack these days is that we don't value failure. So I just want to illustrate this point with a friend of mine. This is Melissa. Melissa and I started doing competitive fishing about the same time. She continues to do it today. I don't do it anymore. Just some back issues. Tough to stand on a boat for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Anyways, but I want to show you some stuff here that I ran across that I have. This is one of the tournaments that Melissa and I fished early on. And you can see here that for the whole tournament, Melissa caught one fish for a whopping 1.88 pounds over, this is over 24 hours of fishing. But years later, this is the 2019. This is last year, what we call our qualifier tournament. Melissa finished first. And so she's stuck with it. She has actually now made the team here in Utah, and she's going on to the Nationals this year. And if COVID hadn't stepped in, she would already had fished that tournament, but I'm sure they're going to have that tournament later on this year. But persistence, understanding that failure is a learning opportunity, is something that we don't do really well in manufacturing. And you all know what I'm talking about, that we look at failure as just that, as a negative. And we've got to get over that. We really have to move along past that whole process. We've been conditioned to think that failure is a negative. From an early age, we've always been conditioned to avoid failure. And even in the workplace, we've always been conditioned to avoid failure. And we all know this by, I stick my neck out and it gets whacked off there, or I tried to do something and it didn't go right and I got in trouble for that. And so we need to make sure that we do that. Some of the greatest businesses today, the most successful businesses, are built on recognizing that failure is a part of the process, right? Really be aware of the mental effects of failure or loss, and make sure that we don't compound that with our systems. And what I mean by that is that there was a Nobel study here done a few years ago that the mental effects of loss, the mental effects of failure, are twice as tough on a person as the gain that we get from a win. So every time, we see a failure, if we compound that by pointing it out and making that negative inside the workplace, we are really doing a lot of harm to our workforce. And we really want to make sure that we build upon that and that we make that a positive as people move forward. Some of our most prominent leaders, we're going to look at examples all around, but Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, Walt Disney, all have years and years of failure prior to their great moments in life, and all of that failure led to experience that brought about their success. So we have to be able to put a culture of valuing failure within inside of our organizations, right? We should shed our adversity as manufacturers, especially in some of the old guard auto industry, some of the old guard auto plants. We really need to shed the adversity to failure. And we need to do that at all levels. And what I mean by that is that, it's pretty common at the top level of an organization to really look at, hey, that person is really an entrepreneur, or they're really out there with great ideas, and sometimes those great ideas work and sometimes they don't, and we pat people on the back because they really are forward thinking and all of that. But you get down to the shop floor and you get to be a maintenance man, or you get to be an operator on the shop floor, and you fail once and your hand gets slapped. So at all levels of the organization, we've got to make sure that we shed this adversity to failure as we go forward. So, all right. So at the end of the day here, kind of wrap up of what I'm talking about, is that we really need to concentrate on this generational gap. It goes both ways. Technological with the young folks, experiential with the older folks. We need to make that gap smaller between both of those, going both ways. Real-time data collection is important. If we want people to use their experience and we want people to use this technology, we've got to be able to do it in real time so that they can have that data and they can go on and make sure that they're making the right decisions in real time out on the shop floor. And then on top of that, we've got to make sure that they have the skills to do that. So the transfer of skills, again, my one thing, it's not about training. It's about skills. It's about the transfer of skills, making sure people have that skills. It's not about butts and seats, right? And then finally, don't let failure become a negative in your organization. All of the new technology that we have, all of the generational gaps that we have, all of these things that we want to accomplish, we are going to fail at them. We're going to have small failures and we're going to have large failures. The question is do we allow those failures to negatively impact the organization, or do we learn from them and move on? So with that, I'm going to leave you with those four things. Hopefully I've been able to kind of impart some of my experience as I've gone through the years, kind of taught you a little bit about fishing as we've gone forward. And so listen, if you have a question about anything that I've talked about, if you want to learn more about fishing, by all means. As a matter of fact, I would highly encourage you to send me an email if you want to talk a little fishing, because we'll do that all the time, or if you need some help teaching your grandkids how to fish. But when it comes to manufacturing, please, if you have any questions about what I've talked about in this webinar, please don't be afraid to drop me a line, and I'll be glad to answer those for you. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and hopefully this has been helpful for you. Thanks. This is Eric Whitley. Thank you.